If you work in a business making real things for real customers, sometimes things are not always rosy. You may have situations where you have a chronic quality or productivity problems, processes that result in high scrap and low yield. You may have had a launch failure, which may result in a recall or withdrawal of product. And now you're under tremendous pressure because of financial and market losses. Well, in this video, I'm going to be introducing to you the 8D problem-solving process, which is a structured approach to problem solving. But a little about myself. I'm Mike Vella. I've recently retired after 42 years in operations and quality. 1977, I joined an automotive OEM supplier of safety critical parts, and I had a great career there of 30 years. Then I moved to my family to the Chicago area to be close to my daughter and her family, and I worked for a great food manufacturing company. My educational background is I got a BS in aviation engineering technology from Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. My MBA is in finance from Wayne State. That's in Detroit, Michigan. I'm a senior member of the ASQ and a fellow of that organization. I'm a certified reliability and quality engineer. I was first exposed to 8D problem solving in the early 80s when Ford introduced this technique when they were trying to improve their overall quality, and part of that process was that they wanted to spread it out to their suppliers. It was called TOPS or TOPS, Team-Oriented Problem Solving. This great outreach to suppliers resonated through their whole organization and through their suppliers and improved overall quality with the individual part suppliers and with Ford itself. It's a team-based method commonly used for solving complex problems and especially used and useful for cause unknown problems. The agenda for this presentation, which by the way is a bit more than 90 slides, may sound like a lot of material, but when I took that 8D class from Ford, it was 5 full days, and so I've condensed it down to about 2 or 3 hours. We'll have this introduction, talk about a tragic jet crash, and maybe think about the root causes and corrective actions of that. Talk about problems that may occur with problem solving, the what, why, and what, when, and why of 8D. We're going to go through each of the 8 disciplines, go through a case study, talk about horizontal 8Ds, and then have a team exercise. But before we start with the serious stuff, maybe we'll have a little fun talking about a flow chart for problem solving. Do we have a problem? Well, we can run away, ignore it. If so, no problem. If you can't run away, well, the question is, did you mess with it? If so, well, bad news, right? Does anybody else know? Maybe we can hide it. If so, no problem. If yes, well, there's big trouble ahead. If no, well, will anybody else find out? No? Don't look the other way. I didn't see it. If yes, big problems. Can you blame someone else? Often useful. No? Got big trouble. If yes, well, no problem. This is not necessarily very helpful. Our case study that we're going to start with is a tragic situation where an airplane crashed into the Pacific Ocean. It was taken from USA Today. And if you bear with me, I'll read it to you. Alaska accident killed 88, led to safety audits by Alan Levinson, USA Today. Alan Levin, USA Today. Washington. The National Transportation Safety Board on Tuesday is expected to conclude that a lack of grease on a mechanism aboard Alaska Airlines Flight 261 caused the jet to roll onto its back and dive into the Pacific Ocean on January 31st, the year 2000. A draft report on the accident says the failure to properly lubricate the mechanism, known as a jack screw, prompted it to break apart. When that happened, a flight control panel on the tail of the MD-80 flopped loose and the jet went out of control. All 88 people aboard died. Though overshadowed by accident that killed more people, the Alaska crash uncovered deep problems in the way airlines perform maintenance and how the Federal Aviation Administration oversees them. The FAA performs safety audits on all major airlines after the crash and revamped its monitoring system. There may be a push among the 4 NTSB board members, that's the National Transportation Safety Board, among the 4 NTSB board members Tuesday to review whether similar maintenance issues could threaten safety on other types of aircraft at other carriers, sources said. The lack of grease on the jack screw was identified early in the investigation as the likely cause. Investigators never discovered why the part didn't have enough grease, but the draft report points to widespread problems with Alaska's maintenance and inadequate oversight by the FAA. Alaska Airlines said that its maintenance difficulties were largely paperwork problems and that it properly maintained the jet. Though they have not been a leading cause of commercial aviation crashes, maintenance failures have led to major accidents. In 1989, a 1989 crash that killed 112 in Sioux City, Iowa, was blamed on inspection that failed to detect a crack in one engine, which exploded. The fuselage on the Aloha Airlines flight in 1988 broke open over the Pacific, killing one after inspections failed to detect cracks. Alaska Flight 261, headed to San Francisco from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, plunged into the Pacific Ocean off California. The jack screw jammed shortly after takeoff. The pilots were prepared to make an emergency landing at Los Angeles when the jet's horizontal stabilizer broke free from the jack screw. Threads on the jack screw mechanism had held the stabilizer in place, but without grease, the threads weakened and sheared off. Though NTSB members appear to agree that the lack of grease on the jack screw led to the accident, they are still debating what to blame for that and what safety recommendations to issue. So folks, this is what I would call a big problem. Killed 88 people. That requires a disciplined problem-solving process. Joey has reported a summary. It was Alaska Airlines Flight 261, January 31st in the year 2000. Flight 261 was headed out of San Francisco and crashed in the Pacific shortly after takeoff. As reported, it was the MD-80's jack screw which operated a flight control panel, and the lack of grease on those jack screw threads resulted in a weakening of the jack screw's threads, and eventually the threads were sheared off. As a result, the loss of control on the MD-80 resulted in the flight to roll and crash, and all 88 people on board died. So this was a serious and tragic accident, loss of life. And I'm sure you're thinking about, well, what was the cause of this problem? Was it inadequate maintenance? Was it inadequate oversight by the FAA? Were there paperwork problems? And who was responsible for assembling the facts of the situation, determining the cause, and implementing corrective action so that it didn't happen again? Was the root cause properly identified? What were the corrective actions that were recommended? When were those corrective actions taken? How was the problem contained until those corrective actions were put in place? Did those corrective actions extend beyond this airline? Did the corrective actions extend beyond this model airliner? And who was responsible for assuring that the corrective actions were taken? So this is what we're going to be talking about, the 8-discipline problem-solving method that, again, I've used many times when you have complicated problems to solve. It is a standardized method to resolve a problem when the cause of the problem is unknown. It's a format to communicate corrective actions while you're solving the problem, because a lot of people want to know what's going on and how well the team is progressing in solving the problem. It's a problem-solving tool. It's a way to solve problems in a standardized way with a structured method. And to a great degree, it's a code of conduct to use facts and data. The commitment to attack the problem's cause and not the symptoms. So I gave you that flow chart a little bit earlier in the presentation as a little bit of a joke, but oftentimes in problem solving, it's a difficult situation. Oftentimes problems are simply not described correctly. The problem solving effort is rushed. Everybody's under tremendous pressure to come up with a solution because it's expensive, maybe publicity involved, and there's going to be pressure on the team to skip steps because maybe the data collection process takes too long, or maybe it's too expensive. Maybe there's poor team participation. Maybe the team members weren't selected properly. They may not be well trained, or maybe they just don't participate as well as they should. Or maybe a problem-solving process in your organization doesn't exist. And the leader of the problem-solving team may be in a position of skipping logical steps because there's pressure. And therefore, they lean on intuition and experience is favored over data collection. As a result, significant efforts are expended, but the results fall short of what's desired. So you use an 8D when you have a problem with an unknown cause, and the scope and complexity of the problem requires the skill and talent of a team to solve. So these are the 8 steps. First, to become aware of the problem and form a team. Second, and very important, is to properly describe the problem. Third, to define and verify root causes. Fourth, to contain the problem so it doesn't get any worse. 5 is to implement long-term, permanent, irreversible corrective actions. 6 is the verification step, and that is to make sure that the corrective actions you've taken work. 7 is to examine systems, similar processes, and related control documents. And since you're using the team, you want to recognize the accomplishments and reward that team for doing good work. So let's go through the steps in a little bit more detail. Step 1 is to form a problem-solving team. The emphasis is on team. You're not going to do this problem-solving process by yourself. No one is that good. You need to establish a small group, 3 to 5 people with the product and necessary process knowledge. The team must have the time and authority to research and test theories. It can't be a part-time job. The team must have a strong leader who can drive the group through the process. And the team must have a champion, someone who is totally responsible and can commit the resources required to let the team find their way through the process and come up with corrective actions. Step 2 is to describe the problem. Oftentimes we use something we call the 5 W's and the 2 H's. Think of a newspaper article. There's a fire down the street. You're interested. A good newspaper reporter will always answer the questions who, what, where, when, why, how, and how many. 8D problem-solving process has to address all those issues. Who, what, where, when, why, how, and how many. We call them the 5 W's and 2 H's. And we use a process tool called the is not format. Step 3 is to find the root cause. Root cause can be defined as the single verifiable reason for the problem, which, if corrected, prevents its recurrence. And so that's the picture of a tree. Think of that tree. It looks beautiful above the ground, above the grass. But below that is a system of roots. And below that, in the root system, is that taproot. And you want to be able to say that is the single verifiable reason for the problem, which we've now corrected, and therefore, if we follow the corrective actions and system fixes that we put in, will prevent its recurrence, finding the root cause. So in step 3, we're going to identify and verify root causes. And to do that, we're going to be using the team to look at all the potential causes. That is a brainstorming activity. And this brainstorming is going to help us identify which causes could explain why the problem has occurred. And then after all the brainstorming, we're going to isolate and verify the root cause that's most likely, or those that are most likely, by testing them against the problem description. We're going to be using a tool called a cause and effect diagram, or sometimes called an Ishikawa diagram, or sometimes known as a fishbone chart. And the bones of the fish oftentimes have manpower, materials, methods, machinery, and Mother Nature, that is the environment. Discipline 4 is to take short-term corrective action. Interim corrective action is critically important, and it's expensive, and it's painful. You have a problem, you have to make sure that it doesn't get bigger, that no more is made, and that you contain the product that's out in the field now. This is a Band-Aid. This does not solve the problem. And later on, we're going to be talking about verifying that the effectiveness of the corrective action is in place. Step 5 is to take long-term corrective actions. Permanent, irreversible corrective actions. Wouldn't it be great to say that we've taken permanent, irreversible corrective action? Irreversible. We're never going to have a problem like this again. We're going to implement ongoing controls that ensure that root cause is eliminated, that it's never going to grow again. And we're going to monitor and impact those corrective actions, again, to verify that the corrective actions are effective. Step 6 is verification step. I've talked about verification several times now. You have to have a plan to prove to yourself, to your management, maybe to your customers, to regulators, to whomever, that the corrective actions you've taken are effective. Because someone's going to ask the question, how do you know? And you have to say, well, here's the plan, here's the data, we've tested it, and it works. The system step is a two-phase step. First is similar processes. Second, related control procedures. For example, if you've had a problem with, and you have a series of 5 machines, and on machine number 3, you found the problem and corrected it. You have to look at all the other machines and address those machines as well. A bigger organization, it may be similar processes in multiple plants, maybe involved in multiple countries, depending on how big your organization is. So that's the similar processes. Related control procedures is the second part of it. So you're in the quality team and your engineering team, and you've created this wonderful quality system. It's beautiful, it works. Except you've had this big problem. And somebody's got to answer the question, why did this system that was so carefully crafted and approved by management fail? Something in the process or in the execution of the process controls failed. We have to find that failure and we have to fix it. So the discipline 7 is the systems step. First, similar machines, similar processes. Second, control procedures. And discipline 8 is team recognition. You've created this team, the team's worked hard, lots of time, money's been spent, commitment, maybe loss of vacation time, who knows, stress. You've got to recognize their efforts. You've got to publicize and reward their efforts in order that when you have another problem, some other time, that team or other people who've heard of that team's success will come forward and help you solve problems again. So those are the 8 steps. Now we're going to go into the 8-step process a bit deeper. Step 1 is, again, to form a team, a small group with specific product and process knowledge. You can't just bring anybody to the team. The team has to be very familiar with what's going on. The team must have the proper time and authority to research and test, collect data. This is going to cost time and money. The team must have a leader who can drive that group through the process. Think of the leader as a sergeant on the battlefield, and he's asking his troop to go and take that hill. That's the kind of person you need. The team must have a champion, and that champion is the one who's not necessarily going to be on the team, but one who can authorize the spending, who can take maybe those people offline and commit those people the time and effort to resolve the problem properly. That's the role of champion. So a very important role is the team champion. The team champion has ownership of the problem. If you will, on that person's desk is the buck stop here. They're the one who is faced with the responsibility of making sure the problem goes away. Therefore, that champion has to be supportive of the final decision, and they can't be supportive until and unless they are informed of the process, the progress of the team, and how well they're doing. They're not involved with the problem-solving process, but they're supportive. They provide money and time for the team to do their job. That person has the authority to implement the team's final decision and corrective action. They assist the team by starting out setting the importance of the task. And oftentimes, the champion selects the team leader, and the team leader then selects the rest of the team. The champion maybe nudges the team along, maintaining pressure to complete the task in a timely manner, not rushing the team, but getting the job done. And in the end, reviewing the team's progress to make sure that the job is well done, because they have the ultimate responsibility. As mentioned, team leader is critically important. The leader is part of the group, serves as the project manager, assures that the team completes each task, sets the meeting dates, establishes the agenda, and has a responsibility for managing the team, sets goals and objectives. Think of the team leader as a sergeant. The sergeant has the troops and orders the troops, helps the troops, but is part of the troops as they go and take that hill. Team leader, critically important. Of course, the team has to have members. They are the core of the problem-solving team. They must have required skills, and that is they must know how the process of problem-solving works, but also they have to be selected in a way because they understand the product, maybe they understand the process, they have specific skills to help the team solve the problem. Now, oftentimes the team leader will bring a team member, a specialist maybe, in for a day or so, like a consultant. Thank you very much for your specialized knowledge. Maybe make a phone call to a critical holder of facts or an understanding. Thank you very much. Go back to work. The rest of the team will work on the problem. The team members can't sabotage the process. They must be committed to follow the process led by the leader. And they must have good judgment. They can't be foolish. They must be good people who are aligned with the team leader, along with the rest of the members, in harmony with the champion, working this very, very difficult process. This team is expected to make competent evaluations because they must have good judgment and recommendations that are weighty and consequential. Oftentimes there's a recorder that's part of the team, someone to take notes, maybe distribute minutes, assist the leaders with meeting logistics, tracks significant non-team member contribution, take care of administrative details, and manage the data storage. You want to have someone who writes things down and puts data, evidence, information in places where they can be found easily. Now, maybe the team doesn't have the skill to get this done, and you may bring a facilitator in to do this job of understanding the 8D process and bringing the team along. So you may be bringing in a facilitator. This is an optional position if the leader isn't very experienced with the process. They may not have any knowledge of the process. It would be helpful if they did, but they may be neutral so that they can draw on the facts. They encourage participation, but more than anything, they're expert in group processes. They monitor and steer the group towards the declared objective. Again, this is an optional position. You may need it. That's the team. Step 2. Step 2 is unfortunately oftentimes mangled, and therefore problem solving gets off on a bad foot. Step 2 is to define the problem. You can't solve a problem unless it's well defined. You use the 5 W's and the 2 H's, the who, what, where, when, why, how, and how many. And you can use something we call the is not format. So in step 2, we're going to define the problem. This is the most critical, and I found the most difficult part of the problem-solving process. Most efforts in problem-solving fail or stall due to a failure to properly define the problem. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. Problem well defined is 80% solved. Again, we're going to define the problem using the 5 W's and the 2 H's to specify the problem. Who, what, when, where, why, how, and how many. Talk about the who. Who are the individuals associated with the problem? You have to characterize those customers who are complaining. Which operators are having difficulty? Which customers are complaining? Very important to go to the floor, go to the Gemba, go see, go to the field, find out the facts for yourself. Think about why these people or groups are having the problem, and in the is not sequence why others are not. The who of the problem. What is the problem? Try to describe the differences between what is normal and what we have now. What does a normal part or product look like versus the product or part that you're having now? Can you define the operational difference? Can it be defined? Can it be measured? What is the physical evidence of the problem? Have the failures been thoroughly examined? Have they been submitted to a laboratory, a metrology lab, if it's a dimensional situation? Where is the report? What are the facts? Are there photographs available? Have you examined them? Look at the samples. Go to the laboratory. Ask for a formal report. Get the facts. Don't assume that you know what's going on. Think about if you can clearly tell the difference between what a good part looks like, one that is not good. Can you tell the difference between parts? Where is the problem? Where on the part did the defect occur? What part of the product? Describe it. Is there a geographic distribution to customer complaints? Is that related to temperature? Is it related to atmospheric conditions? Is there other explanations that may be geographic in nature? Look at the samples. Think about why the defect is where it is geographically and on the part. When did the problem start? How bad was the problem then as compared to it now? Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better? Is it cyclical? What? Do all production shifts have the same problems? What time of year does the problem occur? Is it a chronic problem? Does it occur, for example, in the spring, but never in the fall? Look at the data, set up a timeline, look at long-term trends. Think about why the problem has occurred, when it has occurred. Why did we have the problem? Describe any known explanations, theories. Think about why we're having the problem. How did the problem occur? Get opinions, write them down. Maybe there's some information there. What modes of operation does the problem occur? What procedures were used when the problem occurred? Go to the floor, go to the Gemba, ask for ideas. You must ask the people who are on the floor. They know more about what really is going on than anybody else. Ask those with lots of experience. Have they seen the problem before? I can't tell you how many times you go to the floor, you ask the guys with the white hair, have you seen this problem again? Yeah, maybe. When? Well, 3 or 4 years ago, we had the same problem. 5 years, 10 years ago, what happened back then, Fred? Gee whiz, Susie, under what conditions did it happen? Well, they know. They've got the scars maybe to tell you what's really going on. Think about how the problem could have occurred. Put some numbers to it. What is the quantity involved? Has the number of problems increased or decreased? Deal with facts. Search for data in your records, a customer's records, somebody's records. Somebody knows the trend. Don't rely on memory. Look for data in your group or globally. Search in industry or government databases. You have to look at the facts to see, is the problem increasing, decreasing, or is it cyclical? Think about the number of failures, complaints, and how they could have occurred. Sometimes you'll use tools in defining the problems. Perhaps you've heard of this one called the Pareto Analysis. Concept of the Pareto Analysis is separating the vital few from the trivial many. You've got to be working, the team is going to be working with tons and tons of data. And they have to use some way to prioritize their efforts. So use that data that you've collected earlier in the process, and you stack it up and you maybe collect it and put it into this diagram called the Pareto Analysis. It's called the 80-20 rule. So 80-20 rule. 80% of the flats on your tires come in the last 20% of your tread wear. 80% of the fights that you have with your spouse come from 20% of the problems, like that. Work on what's important. You can't work on everything with the same amount of energy, time, effort equally. Work on the ones, this is where the judgment of the team has to come. Work on the ones that seem most likely, work on the ones that have most payoff. Pareto Analysis. I'm talking about something called the is not analysis. This is a counterintuitive tool. It's hard to use because it makes you think. You think about the definition of the problem one way, and then you think about the definition of the problem from the other side of the coin. As a result, it sharpens the focus of the definition and has you try to understand why it may happen here but not there. On these parts, not on those parts. On this customers and not on those customers. It leads to help you find the root cause. So we're going to use this matrix, and it's pretty easy to follow. Again, in the left-hand column, you're going to be describing who, what, where, when, why, and so forth. And you're going to be filling in this blank on one side what the problem is, for example, what the problem is not, and you may not have the information, you fill it out, and you may go back to that part of the diagram. We're going to go through an example later on of the is and not on a made-up problem. Is not what the problem is, where the problem is, when the problem is, when it's not. A bit more detail. Who has notified you of the problem? Who's affected by the problem? Is not. Who could have notified you of the problem but didn't? Who could have been affected by the problem but is not? What? What is the object that you're having with? What is the object you're having a problem with? What is the problem? What is the defect? What could be happening but is not? What could be the problem but is not? Where? Where do you see the defect on the object? Where geographically have you seen the problem? Where on the object is the problem not seen? Does it cover the entire object? Geographically, where else geographically could you observe the defective object but did not? When did you first notice the problem? Do you have any specific information on dates and times? When in time could the problem been first observed but was not? Where else in the process flow, life, or operating cycle might you have observed the defect but did not? What other times could you have observed the defective object but did not? How many of each object has a problem? What's the trend? How many objects have the problem? How many defects do you have on each object? How big is the problem in terms of dollars, people, time? Is not. How many objects could have the defect but do not? What other trends could have been observed but were not? How many objects could have the defect but do not? How big could the defect be but is not? So in discipline 3, we're looking for the root cause. Again, the root cause is the single verifiable reason for the problem, which, if corrected, prevents its recurrence. In this step, we're going to be defining and verifying root causes. And in this process, often we find we use a technique called brainstorming. In brainstorming, you bring the group together and you're asking the team, why does it happen? And there's going to be a lot of ideas. The leader, the facilitator, has to be very, very careful in brainstorming that everyone contributes and no idea is a bad idea. Certainly, we're going to find that some ideas are better than others, but you can't stomp on someone's idea when they throw it out. Or the next time that person comes around, they may have the solution, they may have a great idea, they might feel intimidated because you stepped on them the first time. So brainstorming is a free-form expression of the intellect trying to find potential causes of the problem. Later, you'll isolate and verify the root cause or those causes that are more likely to be closer to the solution. Call it test and verify. And we're going to be using this thing called cause and effect diagram, fishbone diagram, Ishikawa diagram, to graphically identify all the past and potential root causes. And then later on, we're going to summarize the most likely root cause. You have to ask questions. Have the team think about about the difference between what the good part is versus what we have, the problem. What's changed? What are the dates have changed? Talk about timelines. Ask why as many times as needed, sometimes known as the 5 whys. Why? Why did it occur? Brainstorming. Get those juices flowing. Get the team thinking about the cause. why it could have happened. Then you're going to select the most likely root cause. It's going to take some judgment, but you'll find the most likely root cause. We talk about the cause and effect diagram using elements often known as the 5 M's: manpower, material, methods, Mother Nature, or machinery, but not always. For example, let's just say you have a car in your driveway and it won't start. Well, either you're going to go out there and lift the hood and try to figure out why it won't start by yourself, or you're going to call for a mechanic, have the car hauled down to the garage. In the garage, open the door, and your mechanic, who's very, very familiar with potential causes, is going to try to figure out why your car won't start. An excellent mechanic has these potential causes. They're going to be looking at that engine, trying to figure out why. He's going to be thinking about, well, does it crank? And if it doesn't, then, well, was it the battery? And what do those cables look like? Is it the starter? And if they diagnose it's the starter, maybe there's something wrong with the starter, like the cables that lead to the starter, or the starter motor, or the drive that engages the flywheel, or maybe there's something wrong with the relay. Well, if it's not the starter or the battery, maybe there's something wrong with the harness, the wires that run down to these switches that make the starter go. You got ignition switches. Or maybe it won't crank because the alternator is bad, or the regulator inside the alternator is bad, not charging the battery. Well, maybe it does crank. Well, maybe something wrong with the ignition. In an older car, there's something called distributors, and there's maybe a cap and a rotor and a coil, or something wrong with the coil. So the mechanic has all these potential root causes in mind when they're looking at your engine. Maybe there's something wrong with the basic engine, something wrong with the fuel injection, or maybe there's something wrong, an engine has to have air and fuel, something wrong with the air induction system, wrong with the fuel system. A good mechanic has these potential causes in mind, looking at your engine, trying to tick them off one at a time very, very quickly to get to the root cause, find out which item on your car's engine is causing the car not to start. So here's an example. We talk about manpower, methods, machinery, and so forth. And here's a cause and effect diagram that doesn't use any of them. I just wanted to use this as an illustration of a fishbone diagram, Ishikawa diagram, cause and effect diagram. Other means of finding the root cause is process flow diagrams. Go out with a piece of paper and walk the floor. Start from the beginning of the process and describe every step of the process. Which process starts first, which process starts second, and so forth. You may find it interesting that if you ask several people, maybe people in engineering, people in quality, people in operations, and people on the floor, and they may give you different answers. And that may lead to your root cause and corrective action. Think about the problem in terms of when you heard about it first. Maybe there was some fixes that were implemented, some changes that were made in the process, maybe different materials, people, machinery, methods were introduced. You've got to get this locked down in some kind of timeline so that when you're looking for the cause, you can somehow latch on to something. Well, this happened then, and we did this. Well, this may have changed the problem, and give you more and more information in solving the problem. So a process flow diagram, go to the floor, go to the Gemba, ask questions, and verify that everybody has the same story and people are following the prescribed recipe, the process of how the product's supposed to be made, and timelines. Both tools can help you get to the root cause. So step 4 is one that you may think maybe comes earlier in the process. And folks, I think you'll find that these steps aren't always done in perfect sequence, but certainly the team or someone in authority has to take interim corrective action. You've got a problem, it's out in the field perhaps, customers are complaining. You just can't keep on producing that same old stuff. You have to stop and take containment. Think of this as a Band-Aid. Hopefully it's not a tourniquet. You've got to do these favorable actions to contain the customer from having more problems. Painful, expensive, but you got to do it. And later on, you're going to be verifying the effectiveness of that interim corrective action. You'll recognize step 4 by how much it costs and how much pain it causes you. Oftentimes, interim corrective action involves 100% inspection and replacement of the potentially defective material with certified stock. Don't go easy on this, because what you don't want to do is pull back material, talk to your customer, say, I got this problem, here is material that we've contained, we've inspected, and give it to the customer and they find the problem again. Very embarrassing. Containment may be going for an alternate source of material or components, which may require customer approval. They may want to go to your alternate supplier of raw materials and approve them. Again, may be very clumsy, embarrassing, expensive, but you have to get the job done right. You may have to create an alternate method of processing, which may involve rework. Again, that process approval may come from your customer, their engineering or quality departments. Don't leave them out of the process. It most likely will require increased inspection, increased frequency of tool changes. All these methods and more of containment are expensive and short-term. So, making decisions are hard. It's hard to do. Maybe the decisions aren't clear and easy to make. We use this technique called rational decision making to help the team come up with solutions, because sometimes you just have to decide. In rational decision making, this process, this tool, is used when you have to make a decision on a problem correctly the first time and there's no margin for error. And unfortunately, the best choice of many alternatives is not clear. And the process starts with listing the end result and what is the objective. So, if you have teenagers, or you've been through that life, you know that sometimes teenagers have difficulty separating what's the difference between needs and wants. Needs are mandatory items, measurable items, realistic items. You've got to feed your teenager. You've got to make sure your teenager has enough adequate sleep and education and safety. And, the newest computer or the newest iPhone maybe is not a need. It's perhaps a want. Wants are preferred items. So you have to list the difference between needs and wants to make decisions. Then you're going to have to force rank the wants, list the choices, compare the needs and wants, analyze the risk, and do a little calculation. I'll show you an example. Here's a matrix that we use in the rational decision-making process, and I'll show you a little example. Hopefully you can read this. Buying a house is maybe a once in a lifetime, but certainly you don't buy a house very often. It's expensive, maybe it's risky, and you want to make that decision properly. So you have to decide what's the difference between needs and wants. And, Here, told you that I lived for many years in the Detroit area. And let's just say I wanted to buy a house. And so on the left-hand side, family gets together and say, okay, what are our needs? Well, we got a big family. So it's got to be at least 4-bedroom house. It's got to have 2 full baths. I don't want to drive forever to work, so it's got to be within 25 minutes from work. And as you may recognize, this example was somewhat dated. It's got to cost less than $150,000. Well, you talk to your realtor and they show you many homes and you boil them down to 3. One in Sterling Heights, which is a nice suburb of the Detroit area, one in Commerce Township, and another great suburb, and one in Milford. And you list the facts. So in Sterling Heights, the house had 4 bedrooms, check the box, got 2.5 baths, check the box. It's only 16 to 25 minutes from house to work, and it's $145,800. Great. That house fits the needs. Same thing with the house in Commerce Township, but this beautiful house that we looked at, Milford, yes, 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 it takes too long. It's 45 minutes drive to work. I'm not going to spend that much time on the road, and it's too expensive. It's $160,000. All I can get $150,000 from the bank. So as much as this house in Milford, maybe one that I'd really like or the family really likes, we really can't use it because it doesn't follow the needs. Okay, so now you turn to the family and say, okay, we've established the needs. What are the wants? Well, we like a big family room, and we like to eat-in kitchen. We like to have a really nice garage. It's got to be energy efficient. Got to have good schools. Got to be easy to maintain. Well, which one of these wants is the ones you want most? And you have to force rank your wants. I mean, because they're not equal. Well, family decides that the eat-in kitchen absolutely the most important. And followed closely behind is large family room. So you quantify the want by saying, well, that's a 10, that's a 9. Followed closely by, got to have a nice garage and good schools. And not as important as the other two, it's got to be energy efficient and minimum maintenance. So that you look at the house left in Sterling Heights and in Commerce Township, and you quantifiably examine those wants, and you put a how good is each one of those wants, and you quantify that. Well, this one in Sterling Heights has a pretty big 18 by 22 attractive, fireplace. It's got this, that, the other one. For each one of these items, you try to quantify. It can't be pretty good or so. You try to quantify that want so that you can multiply the how important times the how good to come up with a score. So for example, in the first want, large family room for Sterling Heights, the large family room scored 9 on the want scale, and the how good was 8. So you multiply 9 times 8, 72. 10 by 10 is 100 and so forth. And you add up the score for this house in Sterling Heights, and you come up with 420. Same with the house in Commerce Township. You objectively quantify each one of the wants and multiply the how important times the how good to come up with a score. And so from a rational decision-making process, the house in Sterling Heights is the one you want. Comes up with 420 points. Now, if you come up with this beautiful model and quantifiable model and objective model, and you turn to your family and say, we're going to buy the house in Sterling Heights, and they say, no, absolutely not. We want the house in Commerce Township. Then you got to go back and look at your numbers and say, well, did we quantify the wants properly? Because the facts are the facts. So here is an example of making rational decisions in our problem-solving process, because we're going to be making decisions on the interim corrective action. They're going to be painful. They're going to be expensive. We got to decide which ones are the needs and which ones are the wants. And here's a tool that you might use. Step 5 is implementing long-term permanent irreversible corrective action. And I love this step because it's a commitment to permanent and irreversible. When I was in quality, I love the idea of saying, boy, I'm going to tackle this problem and I'm never going to see this problem again. And if you use the 8D process properly, it really works. And to go through this process, you'd have to define and implement those corrective actions. Implement the ongoing control to ensure that the root cause is eliminated for every permanent corrective action. You have to look back at the root cause and then monitor the impact of the corrective action to verify those actions are effective. So perhaps you see this graphic on the right-hand side. Sometimes you'll recognize this called the Deming cycle, where it's plan, do, study, or check and act. Deming referred to it as the Schuhart cycle. I don't know who came up with it first, but it's a way for you to plan, verify your actions. Implementing long-term corrective actions. Define and implement the best permanent corrective actions. Then go ahead and choose those ongoing controls to ensure the root cause is eliminated. Monitor the impact of the corrective actions and then evaluate the performance of the corrective actions. So plan, do, study, or check, act. The corrective actions must address the root cause in order to permanently eliminate the problem. So take a look at your root cause, make sure they go back to the look at your corrective actions and make sure that they permanently address the root causes. Step 6 is verification, making sure what you've done actually works. Before you start the verification process, you have to sit down and decide what the plan is. What is the plan to quantitatively confirm that the corrective actions you've implemented are effective? So that implies a plan. Team, what we're going to do is we're going to put in our corrective actions and we're going to inspect X number of parts in this way for the next X number of days, weeks, months, and then we're going to verify that the corrective action is gone, is effective. The root cause has been eliminated. You simply just cannot say, well, the corrective action's implemented. Congratulations, go to step 8, congratulate the team. You have to verify that the corrective actions you've taken in short term and long term are effective. Don't skip that step. And again, what you don't want to do is cause another problem by correcting your problem. This is done by a follow-up report. You've got to test the proposed correction in a pilot setting, simulate the solution in the actual or process or field evaluation, verify that another problem is not corrected. How do you do that? Well, you may quantify changes in key indicators by the key dimensions, the key performance, initially by bench or laboratory testing, using statistical process control charts, examine scrap rates. Think about ways that you can show your team, your management, your leader, your champion, your customer, your regulator, whomever, and prove to that group that the corrective actions you've taken are effective. In the short term and in the long term, you owe it to the team, you owe it to yourself. Again, we talk about the 2 elements of step 7, what systems have you addressed? And we talk about similar processes and related control procedures. You have to take a look at similar processes, those different machines that you may have, and those machines may exist in your factory, in your group, in your country, across different countries, wherever in your organization a similar product or process is operating. You have to address that product or process to make sure that the corrective actions you've taken on product X is done on similar product Y. And then you have to go back and swallow your pride and go back and look at those prevention methods, all those tools and methods and systems that you created to make sure that the problem didn't occur, but you have to say, gee whiz, it did occur. So what are we going to do to make sure it doesn't happen? Something failed in your beautiful, elegant, massive control documents and procedures. You have to go back and face the facts that something failed and fix it, because someone's going to be asking the question, gee whiz, what happened in your quality system? And if you answer the question, well, my quality system was perfectly designed and perfectly implemented, well, they're going to look at you and say, well, why did it fail? And if you don't have a good answer for that, you're going to look pretty foolish. We just talked about systems, those management systems, operating systems, practices, procedures, policies, directive, procedures, practices, organization, management systems, and on. Look at all of them. There's a flaw there someplace. Similar processes, what other machines? You have to ask yourself, what other process, products, peoples, places have the potential of having a similar problem? Examine those processes, problems, and apply the fix that you put in to those as well. And step 8, to recognize the team. Recognize the accomplishments of the team. The team's done great work. Make sure they know it. Make sure that they understand how valuable that they were. Give them the recognition that they deserve in some way that's meaningful to them. And that may not apply to every person having that same recognition. Every team may have a different scope or different weight, and they may want the recognition in a different way, and they may deserve it in a different way. Think about that. What kind of reward is appropriate? Is it publicity through an in-house newspaper or luncheon or personnel records, or having the champion come down and shake their hands, lunch, or money, something that means something to them. So I want to take a departure from the theoretical and give you more theoretical here. So I've created a problem that we can go through. Think of yourself on the team as a leader of the team, as a champion of the team. And I've leaned a little bit on a problem that I experienced and twisted the problem around and made a theoretical product and a process that is unrecognizable from the real. So here is the example. You are the quality manager of MV Products, like Vella Products, a company that manufactures and distributes engine pressure sensors for the automotive and small engine industries. It's a spring of the year, and the summer build ahead for your small engine customers has been in full swing for several months as they build ahead for the summer selling season. So if you are selling lawnmowers or tractors, you know that they're going to be consumed maybe mostly in the spring and summer. So that you don't build them in the spring or summer, you build them in the fall and winter so that they can be stocked and sold in the stores. Unfortunately, you received a rash of leak complaints about your MV1234 oil pressure sending unit. So on these engines, perhaps there's this unit called an oil pressure sending unit that sends a signal to the operator of the tractor or whatever machine the small engine's used in, and sends a signal that says, I've lost oil pressure, stop. You have 3 very excited customers, all together with 9 consuming assembly plants. Customer service in your organization is upset. Engineering is pointing fingers at the operations team. And as quality manager, your boss expects you to solve the problem. Guess what? You're getting a lot of help. You've had 10 phone calls, 10 experts within the organization have opinions. No one has facts. There is an urgent need for a solution. The money meter is running and you have no clue. Sounds like a problem? So I've set the table for you. And the first thing that you need to do is organize your 8D team. You are Jerry O'Keefe, the quality manager. And your champion, Joe Biggs, your boss, the president of MV Products, is a great guy. And he's given you the challenge and the opportunity to solve this problem. You've chosen for the leader of the team, Samantha Jones, who's your senior quality engineer. A great opportunity for Samantha to demonstrate her abilities, and when she has a great success with this 8D problem-solving process, she'll have great recognition for doing a great job. On the team that Samantha chooses is Bill Blocker, who is going to be the recorder, and Bill is an administrative assistant. In addition to Bill and Jerry, on the team is John Smith, who's a product engineering manager, Julie Stills, material procurement manager, Lori Basti, the operations manager, Junior Marby, who's actually works on the line on the oil center assembly line. He's line leader. And of course, you are Jerry O'Keefe, the quality manager. So I'm going to be showing you a home diagram of an oil pressure sending unit that I designed. If you want to see a real live oil pressure sending unit to see what it really looks like, I'd ask you to stop this presentation and Google oil pressure sending unit. So let's take a look at our theoretical oil pressure sender. I designed this masterful design at my kitchen table, and it probably looks like it to you, but I think the design will work. So starting from the 10 o'clock position, you see a threaded fitting which is brazed into the rear insert. The rear insert is press fit and sealed into the front body with O-ring. There are two conductive wires. One goes to ground through the case, and the other goes to feed the circuit that runs to the, if you will, the idiot light that tells the operator that you've either made oil pressure or lost it. There's a spring on the right-hand side and then a diaphragm that's just to the left. So in the no oil pressure condition, the spring forces the diaphragm to the left and forces the two contacts together, completing electrical circuit from ground through the light, making the light illuminate. When oil comes from the engine through the fitting, and fills that chamber, the diaphragm overcomes the force of the spring, opening the contact, breaking the circuit, and the light goes off. Pretty simple. There's two major parts of the oil pressure sender, other than all those ancillary parts. Again, the left-hand side insert, and then in some detail, there's an O-ring groove that seals the front and rear, and then it's crimped together. But the O-ring is really the thing that keeps the oil from leaking out all over the engine. So let's talk about our is not. The who. Well, who is, all of MV Products small engine customers, and that's JBB Engines, Senior Products, and Double Eagle Industries. I made up those names. Who is not are automotive engine customers. So it's small engines and not automotive engines. Who? Well, the JBB plants in Kansas City, Normal, and Jasper, Michigan. Senior product plants in Chicago, Detroit, Lexington Heights, Minnesota, Cambridge, Kentucky, and Double Eagle in Normal, Illinois, and in Coal Creek, Florida. Is not any other customer plants. What is the old oil sender MV1234, but no other oil senders. So it's specifically on MV1234. So even early in this process, I hope that you can appreciate how this is helpful, first off, in organizing information so that when you're explaining and defining the problem, you can explain to people what is and is not. It helps you align your thinking. And while you're going through the process here, you might be saying, well, why is it the small engine customers and not the automotive engines? Don't those parts, aren't they similar? Or why aren't they similar? Or maybe you start thinking about differences. This is part of the process. What is the problem? Well, customers are reporting oil leaks on their medium horsepower engine. It's not on the low horsepower engine or the high horsepower engines, and not on the automotive engines. Where is it leaking? Well, oil leaks are reported dripping down from the bottom of the sender. So it's not leaking on the right-hand side, it's not leaking from the connector. Where in the process? Well, oil leaks are reported following customer engine startup. We're not seeing leaks prior to engine startup, and we're not seeing leaks in our leak testing equipment. We leak test all these parts. We wouldn't ship them unless we leak test them, but we're not seeing leak testing. We're seeing them where the engines are started at the customer engine plants. Where geographically? Well, in all geographic locations in the Midwest of Florida, in the customer assembly testing areas. So it's not really a geographic situation, and where it's in the assembly plants in the customer engine testing area. It's not in our manufacturing facility. It's not in our process. We're not seeing in shipping or any other place. So therefore, we're seeing the problem in the worst possible place, in the customer's assembly plant. When? Well, at JBB, we saw it in March 2nd, at their Kansas City plant, the Normal plant on March 8th, at Jasper on March 9th. So it looks like it's a March problem. Senior Products, March 16th, March 2nd, March 25th, at Double Eagle, April 9th, and April 12th. Just kind of wonder why at Double Eagle they saw them in April, and at JBB and Senior they saw them in March. Maybe something there, maybe not. Is not any other point in MV product assembly, testing, shipping, quality, or engineering. We didn't see it in our plant. And it's not at any automotive assembly plant. Well, when? Well, we produced MV1234. It was produced on 15 production shifts in January, 21 production shifts in February, and 32 production shifts in March. So we ramped it up starting in early in the year and anticipating the demand in the spring, so we can get the product out so they can build these products for the customers who mainly consume them in the spring and summer. When in the customer assembly plants? Well, we have some date codes of our production. At JBB, we see date codes stamped on the parts 2021, that's February 2nd, first shift, and 2022, and so forth. So we've collected when we produced them, what date codes, so it gives us some time of an idea of when we produced them. It looked like the problem parts, we produced them mostly in February. Unfortunately, Double Eagle didn't give us that information. So this is not unusual that you have to dig for the production dates so that you can sort of correlate it to what's happened in your manufacturing plant with which parts, which operators, which machines, and so forth. And sometimes you just will not be able to get the information because either the customer won't tell you, or it's impossible to get, or some other reason. So just to quantify the bad news, it's getting pretty expensive. JBB $769,000 so far. Senior $456,000, Double Eagle almost $1 million. There's been replacement and special freight costs of $356,000, and we haven't even counted the internal overtime, inspection costs, to the employees, their pride, lots of stress. And so this is getting a lot of visibility. It's getting expensive. That money meter is running. How big? Well, January production was over 214,000, February 312,000, and March production almost 500,000. So it's a big, big problem. Put them together, you're looking, pretty close to 1 million units. So you bring your team together and make everybody comfortable and say, okay, this is brainstorming. Let's all talk about what could happen. So we have dimensions. Well, what about O-rings? What about the plating and brazing process? What about the customer? What about the stamp components? So you get the ideas and you say, well, gee whiz, maybe we made them wrong. Oversized rear OD, undersized OD, over and under swage, uneven crimp. Well, maybe the O-ring, maybe it was damaged. Maybe we just didn't put it in. Maybe we put it in the wrong place. Well, maybe there's components. Maybe there's holes in the stamped components, small cracks. We didn't see them. Maybe there's excessive tool marks and the O-ring can't seal it. Maybe we incorrectly formed the O-ring groove and it just can't seal. Maybe in the plating and brazing process, maybe we plated plating or machine residue on the O-ring groove. Maybe the plating process was no good. Maybe we didn't braze the threaded fitting in properly. Maybe it leaked somehow, got past our leak testers. Maybe that electrical connector was brazed in. We got the same thing. Maybe the customer, is it possible that they could be cross-threading this thing or maybe over-torquing it, damaging the threads? Maybe they've damaged the connectors. Maybe there's some other problem like damaging to the old MV1234 when they install it. So maybe these are the most likely root causes. We don't know. Now what we have to do is we have to investigate. If this is our population of most likely root causes, they all can't be the problem. We have to go back and we have to test each one because they all involve the MV leaks at small engine plants. So that you can see that this looks sort of like a fish bone. That's the head of the fish. Again, Ishikawa diagram, or sometimes known as the cause and effect. This is the effect and these are the potential causes. So what you have to do is you have to go back through and you have to look at each one of those potential root causes and investigate them and either prove them or disprove them or put them on hold until you get more information. Let's go through it. So dimensions, that was one of the root causes. Well, we got the quality team and they reviewed all the stamping documentation in January, February, March and found all the dimensions within specs. Well, documentation most likely would tell you that. Returned parts from JBB and Senior examined external parts and found dimensions within specs. Thank goodness. Whew. Well, engineering was asked to review the MV1234 design to determine if similar parts are compatible with engineering designs from previous validation studies. So let's go to engineering and we'll say, we got this part. Is it more or less likely to leak? Is it compatible with other designs? Did you make this one off? Was the design changed somehow? What's going on with the design? And hopefully you get a good report that says, hey, the design's great, it's been validated. There's nothing wrong with the design. How about the O-ring? Well, we take the parts that we had returned, take them to the lab, and we're trying to find out if the O-ring was installed or not. Maybe we missed it. Was it mislocated or something like that? So we tear them apart and we say, well, all the return part O-rings were in their proper location and undamaged. Great job, operations team. You install the O-ring in the group. A quality assurance laboratory has reported, however, that there have been some kind of oxide found on 2 of the return samples. So something with the plating. Don't know what it is, something for you to further examine. But what is with the oxide? Well, you take a look at the customer and you say, well, gee whiz, has the customer somehow mismanaged or misinstalled. Not pointing any fingers, but we just need to know. So you look at the parts and say, well, all the return parts exhibit normal engine assembly practices. That looks like they installed them right. We send our teams into the customer assembly plants and we say, will you keep an eye on how these operators on all the shifts are installing our parts? You know, maybe we got new employees and maybe new, you know, whatever. Let's make sure that their installation procedures are okay. Well, they have. Our people have been in there. Customers doing a good job. So you ask our sales team to go in there and thank the customer, thank their operations teams for their cooperations. We just have to make sure. So you ask your materials people to talk about the stamp components, and we again bring the parts back. We look at customer retains. In every operations, you oftentimes the quality teams have retains, parts that were sort of sampled, put on the shelf, put them in little boxes, bags, whatever, and the retains of the production. So let's go take a look at those parts. Well, component retains from January and February and March were examined. Unfortunately, we find 0.8% or 19 out of 2,400 retains of the rear bodies were found out of round beyond specification. And 12% of the front bodies, sealing areas, were found to have slight tooling marks. So, well, that's not good news, but is our process robust enough to overcome these? I don't know, but it's not good that we found retains that were out of spec. So something's going on, and you have to kind of wonder why it didn't show that in the documentation. So our production engineering teams examine the 1, 2, 3, 4 tooling and repair as needed. Go back and fix those parts of those tooling that causing those nicks, causing those parts to be out of round. Operations to examine tooling and perform preventive maintenance examination methods, first piece off samples and maintenance schedules. And you probably want to ask your quality and audit teams why we found parts in our retains that were out of specs and we didn't find anything in the documentation. And how about plating and brazing? Well, all the return parts before we tore them apart, we cleaned them and we leak tested them in our normal production leak testers using our air decay leak testing criteria, which is 15 psi for 5 seconds, using a calibrated leak tester not to exceed 1 cc per minute air. Pretty standard leak test. You say they have no leaks. So what does no leak really mean? For us, no leak means it can't exceed 1 cc per minute air. Well, we cleaned them, we put them on a leak tester, and guess what? No leaks were found. So using our conventional leak test, we're not finding the leaks that occurred in the field. So you got to say, well, why not? I guess our leak tester is somehow screwed up or not severe enough. So we start saying, well, at what point would internal testing find leaks found in the customer? So we create a new leak test. Instead of air decay leak testing, we submit our return parts to air underwater. So we're sticking the parts on some kind of pressure source, and we're sticking the parts like in a fish tank underwater, and you're looking for bubbles. And we test them at 20 psi, 40 psi, and 60 psi. And criteria is appearance of bubbles following a 1 minute submerge. So pressure, looking for bubbles, 1 minute. Well, 0% of the leaks of the known leakers leaked at 20 psi, 4% of them leaked at 40 psi, and all of them leaked at 60 psi at the crimp joint. So they're leaking at above 40 psi. and they're leaking at the crimp joint. So this gives us some direction. Some bad news, but it's good news because we finally found the leak, and we found a test that will actually find the leakers if they exist. So we submitted 50 air underwater leaking parts to the laboratory for destructive examination. Why did they leak air underwater? Well, destructive laboratory testing found an air oil leak path at the O-ring groove. And they concluded that it was not the misfit of the parts, not the crimp, or not the tooling, or not the little scratches, but they found that these residual oxide created a tiny leak path through the oxide, and this non-dimensional path for the oil to pass, or the air in our air underwater test to pass past the O-ring and through the crimp joint. So we finally found our root cause, and it's a highly unlikely, but there it is, an oxide allowing the air under high air pressure, oil pressure, to leak past the O-ring. So what are we doing to contain the problem? Well, we got some dates here on the left-hand side, and actions and status. Well, we issued order to contain all these parts with inventory date codes that aligned with the February, no matter what date, no matter what shift. And the materials department contained these. They're stuck in a warehouse someplace. We asked the quality team to contain and review all the quality and production records for January, February, March, so that we can look and examine, compare, contrast, figure out, did we have any semblance of the situation? And all those records are on hold, and they're in conference room number 2. And we're going to ask the material procurement team to contact all material and component suppliers to contain all their production quality records for January, February, March. So this is all done early. We want to jump on it. Some of this is probably going to be wasted effort, but we're going to look at the records and hold them so that we can examine them. We're going to send our engineering, sales, quality team to all nine customer sites to observe production lines and collect information. We expect that to be completed by April 20th. We simply don't have enough people to send everywhere. That's the way it is. We don't have infinite resources, but we hope by the April 20th we're going to get that done. We're going to ask on April 16th, the operations team to review all of our manufacturing quality procedures to make sure that we're following our procedures, and we completed that. And that report, those records are in conference room 2. On April 18th, after we found the marks and so forth on the retains, we're going to replace the crimp tooling. We're going to perform annual brazing fixture preventive maintenance and ask the leak tester calibration source to come in and double check our leak tester operation, make sure our leak tester, which has been good for years and great for all these other processes, to make sure that it's working properly. And that was going to be completed by the 25th. So we're going to continue on our journey here for interim corrective actions. Our team's going to develop a new kind of test. It's going to be slow. But we know this is a test that creates visibility for our leaks. So we're going to create this air underwater leak tester for MV1234 rather than air decay tester. And since we know that at 20 and 40 psi, I really didn't catch them all, so we're going to make sure that it catches them at our best knowledge, 60 psi, 1 minute without leak bubbles. And tooling is going to be completed. It's going to take a while. It's going to be done by the 25th of April. On the 25th, we scheduled production trials, and but unfortunately, the production rates slow down to 50%. We just can't leak test them fast enough. So the HR team needs to arrange for leak testing on second and third shifts. We're going to be spending a lot of money on overtime, health and wellness to make checks to make sure that we're not working people too hard and so forth. And on April 26th, we've got 1 million units out there. Our operations and materials team need to figure out how in the world we're going to replace all those million units and support that seasonal production with our air underwater testing. Again, this is containment. Our customers are screaming for these products. They got to build these lawn tractors and so forth. The million units we have out there are not that good. Some of them leak. We have to contain them. We have to send them certified stock. And we can only make them at 50% of the rates. When we need to be going crazy on production, we can only run them at 50%. It's going to be expensive and painful. So long-term containment is all about, you're in the middle of it. You have to continue production, and you have to think about how we're going to fix this problem long-term. Well, one option is to continue containment, and that's at air underwater tests. We know it's effective. And you figure out how much is that going to cost? Well, it's 25 cents labor more to each unit, and the scrap rates are 60%. Clearly, this is not an acceptable alternative. Well, this is a manual process, so we can tool up and do it in an automated way, maybe a robotic air underwater leak tester. Well, that makes the labor cost go way down to 5 cents versus 25 cents, but it's a month lead time, so you can't make this leak tester fast enough. Or we can re-engineer the MV123 and add an additional O-ring and groove in the sealing area. Engineering is optimistic, but will not guarantee the results to be zero leakers. Materials and engineering estimate that additional tooling to make the additional O-ring groove and extra O-ring is going to add 10 cents per unit. No good. Margins are razor thin on this product anyway. We're not going to add all this extra cost and tooling to make this product good. We got to figure out another way. So we fortunately found that the real root cause is something to do with the oxide. So our examination of quality production records show that our plating current and chemical controls are inadequate to assure elimination of oxidation in the O-ring groove. Clearly, something in our process, whether it was the current applied to the plating process or the chemicals, the rinsing or something, went sideways on this, causing an oxide, and the oxide resulted in oil passing around the O-ring, resulting in a leak. Well, we could outsource plating. Short-term impact is 8 cents per unit. Go to a plater down the street. We could rebuild our plating and controls equipment. Cost can be $125,000. That's going to take 90 days to do it. In addition, we can install improved chemical monitoring equipment for $12,000 to make sure that the chemicals don't somehow get depleted or contaminated. We probably ought to install accelerated environmental testing equipment with an expected cost of $34,000. So we turn this over to our team champion and say, listen, this is what it's going to cost. Internal, external is going to cost 8 cents per unit. And we're going to make sure that the outside source is going to be top-notch quality, or we can fix our own equipment internally, monitor the equipment, and monitor the results. Which way are we going to go? So we have to have a plan to validate our corrective actions. So our validation of short-term corrective action is to continue our containment actions, air underwater at 60 psi, because we know it works. We need to have quality and operations arranged for customer site visits once per month per customer plant to monitor their leak rates. Because, the last thing our customer wants is to send us a report every day. That's not their job. We need to be in their plants validating that our corrective actions are effective. And if we do find anything wrong, return those leaking parts for analysis. We need to, initially, we need to visit our outside plating source 3 times a week to assure that their process chemicals and monitoring equipment is producing oxide-free parts. We don't want their process. We've loaded them down with this burden. They didn't have this business before. We don't want their process to go sideways and have another problem. And in terms of our long-term corrective action, our quality team needs to develop and validate plating controls and environmentally monitoring procedures and methods to assure that our processes are bulletproof. So our engineering materials and quality systems, we need to go and look at our design failure modes effects analysis and process failure modes effects analysis for potentials of plating and coating failures. What in these very complex documents could have predicted that we could have had coating failures? What risks did we apply? Were those risks properly evaluated? We need to ask engineering to review our air leak testing capabilities for calibrated known leak rates as related to engine oils. We're air decay testing, but our customers are using engine oil. How does that really relate? Is the air decay testing method that we've used reliable? Our customer service team to go to our customers' assembly plants to, again, monitor their failure rates and processes and procedures to assure fast response time. If they do have a problem, we don't need them to store them up and give us a report at the end of the week. We need to have immediate feedback to know that that everything's going well or not going well. And materials to review our inventory control methods to assure that our work in process and finished goods inventories are containing those parts that we put on hold and flowing good certified products to our customers in a very expeditious manner so they don't run out of parts. And then our senior engineering team needs to review all the similar products that we have to make sure that we have validated the risks associated with plating controls and painting procedures, because what we sure don't want to do is solve this problem with MV1234 and have one of our other plated or painted parts go through the similar failure with oxide getting past the O-rings and causing us grief on those parts as well. So the team's done a great job. Customers are unhappy, but now they're happy that we solved their problems. Our management team is unhappy that it costs us so much money, but they chalk it up for something learned. Our people are enthused with quality, and they see that the company is changing their methods and moving forward. And so while it was a painful and difficult process, going through the process in a logical manner, everybody feels good about good work they've done. So Bill Blocker, John Smith, Julie Stile, Lori, and Junior, along with Samantha Jones and Jerry, were recognized for their work in the quarterly newspaper. In addition, they were, and their families were invited to a family president's dinner, and a great time was had by all, and they feel really good about the work they've done. So, in summary, I'd urge you to use this 8D method as a standard for addressing problems, especially those problems with an unknown cause. You can use the 8D method as a format for communication. Very important to update the team on the status of corrective actions, and also to increase awareness and to report progress on improvements. Use the structure of the 8D method to drive improvements in quality and productivity, not only on the problem that you're facing, but on other products as well. Use the integrity of the 8D method to be open and true to the facts and the data. Have a commitment to attack the problem's root cause and not its symptoms, and you'll use the tool properly. If you want some more practice using 8Ds, click on the link below. Pull your teams together in a meeting room, some flip charts and some markers, and use all the steps to solve this case study. It's very interesting. So I also promised you a shortcut method, sometimes known as a horizontal 8D. So when you don't have a cause unknown problem, but you still want to have some method to record issues of safety, of productivity, or quality, some incident, we use this form called a horizontal 8D. Pretty simple. Report number XXX, the date, and in these columns, you provide a description, a quantity, the problem statement, what interim corrective action, what root cause, and what permanent corrective action. For example, in this column, in the description, use this column to describe the problem in some kind of generic way. For example, shipped mislabeled parts. Use this column to record how many. Well, we shipped 17,560 mislabeled parts. Well, give me a little bit more detail. Well, we shipped parts shipped to customer A instead of customer B on April 17th. Holy cow, we put them on the wrong truck. Well, what short-term corrective actions have been taken? Well, Aero Freight's going to move the load on April 19th. Well, what really happened? What was the cause? Well, the bill of lading got mixed up in the shipping department. What permanent corrective action are we following? Well, we're going to develop a color coding bill of lading for each customer. Jack Spears is going to do it. We got 5 customers. We're going to use yellow, blue, green, so on in sequence. So not only will the shipping department know that yellow goes with customer B and green goes with customer C, by reading it, they can relate the colors to the bill of lading. One more step for them to not get the things mixed up. And I've given you examples here on rust and cut finger, the safety issue. So why don't you take a look at that. So horizontal 8D, pretty easy to do, but very important step to record issues that are not cause unknowns. So now that you're practitioners of 8Ds, you can go back to the lack of grease and our jack screw. So let's pretend for a minute you are the leader of the FAA MTSB problem-solving team on the MD-80 crash. Who did you choose to be on the team responsible for assembling the facts, determining the cause, and implementing corrective action? Were they the right people? Did you bring in any consultants? Was the root cause properly identified? What containment actions did you take? What permanent corrective actions were taken? What was the plan to validate your ICAs and PCAs? What systemic actions were taken on other MD-80s, on other airlines, on other aircraft builders, and on other model airliners? And how did you plan to recognize and reward the team for their hard work? So this is the end of our presentation on 8D and permanent corrective action problem solving. I wish you good luck with solving problems with unknown causes. If you have any questions, you can email me at mvimproves@gmail.com. Thank you very much.